Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Um, so today, I'm happy that you've all come back even after our XPath training yesterday. I know that one can be kind of hard to grasp sometimes. XPath takes a little bit of practice, but like I said yesterday, I promise if you stick to it and work on each of your agents writing custom XPath, it'll come and it'll be quite beneficial for your agent building experiences. So today for course 3, we're going to be mainly covering web console features. We're going to spend a little bit of time in the agent builder looking at some of the actions in the action list and reviewing what they do. Just a brief amount of time on that. And then we'll jump straight into the agent dashboard and show you some of the abilities that you can do within there. The harvesting settings, scheduling, exporting, publishing, notifications, views, fields, jobs, and debugging. So this will be quite a bit of content we're covering. Luckily, a lot of it, I'm sure a lot of you have had exposure to already, but we're going to try to cover as much as possible without making it too basic for some of the stuff that you already know. So once again, just as always, I'd like to make that reminder that if you haven't signed up for the last 2 training sessions, tomorrow and Friday, to jump on. Also a reminder, let us know if you would like a copy of the training videos. They should be ready hopefully later this week, but it may run into next week before we're able to send out each of the videos. So yeah, that's all we'll mention there. Alrighty, so we're going to go straight to our agent dashboard, and we'll see. So I started running this agent at the end of our session last time, and we'll see it collected 4 items, and then on the 5th item, it hit an error. So we are going to be diagnosing that a little bit to try to figure out what went wrong. In the meantime, we're going to come into the agent builder, and real quick, this won't be specific to our agent, but I'm going to go over a few of the actions, well, each of these actions in the action list to make sure that you're familiar with how they work and when you would use them. So here we are in the agent builder in our action list. Capture list is one that you're probably familiar with, where you click on one action and you're able to choose a capture list and click on a similar item. If for whatever reason it's not allowing you that ability, you can come click it manually. And you'll notice that a lot of actions, for example, if we can click right here, it'll give us a list of options of what we could do to try to capture or click or basically just interact with that element on the page. But there are many actions that are only accessible from the actions list. And sometimes maybe you'll click like on a page list and Mozenda won't recognize it, that it should allow for a page list. And then you'll have to come in here and you would do that manually in that instance. So with that, let's take a look at each of these. So we've got our capture list. Capture name value pairs can be useful, but it can also be a little risky at times. So let me show you an example of how that would work. So we're going to scroll down to that table that we had last time where we capture the brand name and the item weight and the product dimensions. So that's right here. So what a capture name value pairs would do is it would do similar to what we showed with the associate nearby text, but it would do it dynamically. So it would find all of these headers and it would find all results that are associated with it. So you basically follow a pattern that it says. So for example, we'd come here, we'd say capture name value pairs, click 2 values you want to capture. We want TCL and 13.4 pounds, and then click the label associated with TCL, which would be brand name. And it would basically set up a table like this, capturing the information that we want with each of these headers that are right here as column titles on the top. So like I said, that can be useful. The only danger to it is that it's dynamic. So if this changes, you could be dynamically adding fields to your database, well, essentially to your agent's collection, which could essentially mean an endless number of fields if you get a whole bunch of different types of product header, technical detail headers in here. Similar thing with the capture table. Both of these are very powerful. Capture table would have you follow the same basic flow, which is click 2 values that you want, click a row, click a column, and it would build a pattern to find all the values that you want. Obviously, it would do it with XPath that it discovers on its own. So they're a little bit harder to manipulate, those XPaths. But they are there if there's a really simple table or that you feel confident the fields won't be changing frequently, then they can be a very safe option. So keep that in mind if you're scraping from a table that you feel is going to be pretty consistent every single time you scrape. We're familiar with capture text. A click item we're also familiar with. A reminder that best practice is to name the click items. So when you create a click item, you go to properties and you give it a name just so you remember what it's doing. And even better practice is if you're using that click item to go to a link, click on a link, rather than use a click item, it's generally better to capture the text and then use a load new page action to load that URL that you capture. Set user input is a very powerful option. One way that we could implement it in our agent, if we, for example, didn't only want to look at televisions, but we instead wanted to use a set user input action, and we'll use an input list. And so we could import from a file on our computer, we could use data from another collection, or we could use a manual entry. So we could call this search terms, for example. And instead of just searching for televisions, we could also search for speakers and computers. So this would essentially create a list that would pass in, using the percentage signs, each of these values as parameters, so it would search each of these values. Now it's not fully implemented because we'd also have to click on the search icon. That would navigate us to a third page, and we would drag all of this information down there. But we won't use that in our agent, but it would be possible to do that. And there's actually a way you could dynamically add in search terms here that we'll cover a little bit tomorrow. So that's how we would use the set user input. You could also just do an individual set user input action without it being in a list like this. All right, custom values can be really useful as well. So custom value, we're going to go ahead and say capture custom value. And actually, we're going to keep one of these. So we're going to call this website, and we'll call it Amazon. So as we know, as I mentioned earlier in the week, we are going to be gathering information from Amazon up through tomorrow. And then on Friday, we're going to use another website to gather all the same information or everything that's available. And we're going to do it optimized in a really short span of time. Now, so it could be valuable when we combine that data set to ensure that we've got a field that indicates that is a custom value, meaning it's the same for every action here. Custom value to identify which collection it came from or which website we gathered it from. Another reason you might want to use a custom value, let's add one right here. Let's say you for some reason wanted to combine two fields. We'll just call this reviews. So we wanted to combine total reviews. So we would use a parameter like this, total reviews and percentage signs, the dash in the middle, and then also combine that with average rating. So we'll click create action, and right now it will be, you'll just see the percentage signs for it. That's because the agent hasn't actually run yet. It doesn't actually have values for total reviews and average rating yet. But once we run it, we'll see that it'll capture these two values. Oops, I probably should have gotten rid of the set user input, but like I said, because we're not hitting search, it won't actually modify anything. But you see how it's setting each of those speakers. So if we had a click item in here, we could go and find fields for each one of those values. All right, so I'm going to stop the agent now. All right, so now we look at our testing results, and we'll see that, where did it go? Down at the end. See if we can find that reviews field that we just made. Right here. So see how it's now combined total reviews with average rating. So that's one reason you might want to use a custom value. We won't need that for ours. You also have the option to capture an image. Like I mentioned yesterday, this will capture the image URL as a text field. It won't download the file. You could capture a screenshot of your page. This is particularly useful for debugging. Let's say it works, your agent works in the agent builder, but it continues to fail in the web console. You don't have any visibility as to what the page looks like to potentially give you insight as to what's going on. You could take a screenshot of it though, and then look at that screenshot after it fails and see what the page looks like and see if maybe from that you can glean some information about what went wrong. Clear browser cookies is an action that you would use if you're working with a website that requires really particular session data. So for example, maybe if you click on an item and it changes cookies in the background, and then when you try to click on another item, it won't let you because it's gotten into a weird state. Clear browser cookies allows you to just get a free look at each item that you click on, essentially. So that can be useful for a variety of options. The rotate IP address action, we've mentioned that when you use premium harvesting, as we show right here, that it rotates the IP addresses from time to time, and by default it rotates approximately every 3 requests. What the rotate IP address does is it allows you to set a point in your agent. So if we put it right here, it would override the default IP rotation pattern and instead only rotate every time the agent hits this step right here. So this is something that you probably won't need to use unless for some reason you're communicating with our support team and they recommend that you use it. So our download file action is very useful as well for particular files that would download directly to your page, or sorry, to your browser or your computer. So like I said, it wouldn't quite work for trying to download an image, but it would work if you're trying to download a file. Go back to previous page. There are some websites that you click on an item and it doesn't necessarily navigate you to a new URL. It just changes the way the page looks. So you can't create like a new page like this but retain the first page. So to get around that, you would use a go back to previous page action, and that would just take you back to the state you were before clicking on whatever you clicked on. An input list is just like what we used right here. So you can use an input list, feed it from a collection or an import file and manual entry, and you can draw those values from those collections, from those lists, and use them in your agent by passing them in as parameters, like we did here with those percentage signs. So we'll use this one from a collection tomorrow in a very advanced way that'll be really useful. Load new page, we've already used that to load a URL to a new page. Loading a cookie store, I won't go into too much depth here, but this is a really useful feature for sites that you potentially need to log into, especially if it requires two-factor authentication. It can make agent building a little bit complex, especially if you have to try to communicate with the agent to tell it to input some two-factor authentication code. But the load cookie store action allows you to essentially load to a page, log in, save a snapshot of the cookies while you're logged in, and save it to your account, and then you could load them so that when you run an agent on that page, you can load the cookie store so that it's as if you are already logged in. You re-upload that snapshot of when you were already in. So these can be very useful if you have questions about that, as well as pretty much the rest of these ones that we're going to go over. I'd really recommend reaching out to your customer success manager. They're for a little bit more particular use cases, but the use cases that need them, they can help a lot for. So notify email, notify URL. We won't go into too much detail, but essentially if you're, for example, in a list, we put a notify email action here, and we could put like an email address here, training at mozenda.com, for example. What it would do is each time the agent reaches that action, it would send that email address an email with all of these values. So in particular, it'd be useful, not necessarily for a site that you are scraping a ton of information, because you wouldn't want 1,000 emails sending in. But if it was a shorter amount of time or shorter number of items, and you didn't necessarily have the time to wait for the agent to run, finish up, refresh the job, and then publish the data, this could send you live updates as it goes. Note that the notify URL action does the same thing, but it would ping a URL that you provide. So you'd have to set up a URL on your side. Note that these do not work in the agent builder. So when you're testing the agent builder, you won't get an email or a URL pinged, but when you run it with those actions in the web console, it will. Refresh page action is another action that you might use if the page just sort of enters into a weird state after clicking on something maybe, and refreshing it just gives you a fresh look gives the agent a fresh look at each page before moving on to the next item. Run JavaScript is an advanced feature. It's essentially a functional JavaScript editor. It's very basic right now, so it's generally best to test your JavaScript elsewhere and put it in here. So this gives you a lot of ability to manipulate the page however which way you want. Keep in mind that because our browser is IE based, it is only compatible with JavaScript that is compatible with IE browsers. So it's significantly less compatible than for example, Chrome is. So keep that in mind, that sometimes you might write some JavaScript, test it in Chrome, and then try to put it in here and it's not working, and it could be because it's not compatible with Internet Explorer. So scroll item is what you would use if you need to load more content to the page, potentially. So there's a pattern called lazy loading. So some websites may have 10 items and you have to scroll down and then it will load 10 more. So scroll item would allow you to scroll as much as you would need to load as many items as you want, or to load all of them. And wait seconds, we can add wait seconds to actions, which we've seen, or the loadings of pages, but you can also just add wait seconds on their own to allow time for the web page to load, or maybe if you did use JavaScript, to allow time for the JavaScript to execute. So you can manipulate how long you wait. There's a few other settings here, but they're pretty unique when you'd have to use them, so we won't take any time on that. So with that, that's kind of an overview of each of our fields here. Let me delete each of these. I'm going to save it. We did add one field. Sorry, an overview of each of our actions here. So we did add one field, so I'm going to save the agent. So while that's saving, let's go take a look real quick while that's saving at our error. So one of the things we want to go over today is debugging, because it's very useful. A lot of times when I train people and people ask me what the most valuable skill is that you can learn about agent building, we have all these really great features. There's XPath, there's regular expressions, but when it comes down to it, being able to properly debug an agent can make all the difference. And because right now we see an error and often we get frustrated, but I get excited when I see an error because it means that there's something that was detected that went wrong. I'd much rather have something be detected than let it slide by. So our agent hit an error. And let's take a look at how we might try to figure out what error that was that went wrong. So first thing I always do is I read this description. It says an item cannot be found on the page. So we're going to hover over the little I info icon, and it says action, capture brand name, item weight, product dimensions, whose first XPath is the table, was not found on page 2. So what that's saying is that one of the items didn't find this capture action right here. So whatever XPath we wrote didn't work for one of the actions. So we want to know which one it is, right? So there's a few ways we can do that. The best way on most websites, it doesn't work quite right in Amazon, but is to come over here to the jobs table and click on whatever job it is, and it's in an error state. For us, it's just the only job there. This will give us that description again, saying which action failed. And the best option is to come down here. All of these fields are really useful, by the way, but the one that we're going to focus on, obviously, is error, and then also this job option right here. So this job option will tell you a lot about the different requests that went through, which ones were ran with premium, which ones were bypassed, which ones were blocked, the total amount. But it also tells you a restart state. So right here, it's telling us that currently the agent, it hit an error and stopped on page 1 on restart index 5. So that it's consistent, because if we go back to our data, it gathered 1, 2, 3, 4 items and then failed on the 5th one. So in any other website, I would come here and I would go to the item list and I would go to refinements and I would tell it to only include that 5th index for now, just for testing. And you could even just do it with test settings. Yeah, probably test settings is better because you don't want it to save to your account, save to the agent. Test settings only are applicable in the agent builder. So we could specifically say that we only want index. Oh, maybe it doesn't let you give a specific index. So we would set a refinement, but we just remove it later. And it would go to the 5th item and run. And if it fails in the agent builder, that's great, because we'll see why it fails, and we could modify the agents to fix that. The only problem is that, like we've already mentioned, Amazon will often move the listings around, so it may no longer be index 5 when we run the agent now. So what we're going to do instead, this is what you would usually do. In my opinion, the best way to debug a particular item is to take the list and refine it to the exact one that you want. But in this case, because it's Amazon and because it probably moves the order around, instead we're going to look at this 5th item and we're going to be happy that we captured the product URL. So you notice that it's missing a lot of these fields, especially the images as well, because it couldn't find these ones, and because those are before image, it didn't continue on to capture the images either. So we're going to capture the product URL that we gathered. and put it in here. So what it said it was missing, right, was that brand name and item weight table. So if we remember right, and we scroll down, what we're looking for is this table right here. So it's saying it can't find it. So we're going to scroll down in our browser, see if we can find it. So we find a similar table. There's no other ones down there. There's a similar table. It's called product information. It's got product dimensions, item weight. It doesn't look like it has brand name. If we come back over here, it looks very similar. The only difference is that here it says product information and then only has one table. Here it breaks it into technical details and additional information. So right away we get an idea that a lot of the data, except for brand name, is there. It's just in a slightly different spot for one of these items. So that's okay. What we're going to do is write an alternate XPath. So previously we were writing this XPath, which if you notice, we'll copy that. We will type F12 on our computer and go to Elements and Control F and put that XPath in, and it's not going to find anything. So let's instead go inspect this table and see if we can build a new one. So we have another table here. This one's called Table ID Product Details Detail Bullets Sections 1. So it's actually pretty similar. Instead of product details, details, bullets, we originally just had product details, tech spec. So it sounds like this is something that's pretty similar. It's just in a slightly different format on this page. So what we're going to do is capture that ID and replace the one that we have here. There we go. So now we're finding that ID correctly, that table correctly. So let's copy that and we'll put it as an alternate XPath. So on the next line. So what this means is it will first try to find this value, this XPath. If it can't find that, it will move on to the next one. And because our refine capture text is just gathering the whole table and then parsing it into the details that we want. Oh, this is the one that already has it actually. So let's test it now. Let's copy this URL, go over to our agent builder, and we're on page 2. We're going to input that URL right here and click enter. It'll ask if we want to close the agent and load a new URL. No, we just want to load the new URL into the current page for testing purposes. So we're going to load this product and we're going to see if we're able to capture not brand name because it's not there, but at least item weight and product descriptions. So we'll see right away that it's not quite hitting an error anymore. It is hitting error on images, so we'll want to take a look at that as well. But we are getting item weight and product dimensions now using our alternate XPath. Oh, and it is still finding the images. It looks like it just took a second to actually load them. Well, there we go. So see how, if we know how to debug correctly, looking at the details that we do have available, and it will be even easier on other websites because they don't tend to move things around as much. You can scope in on exactly where it fails and generally, right, instead of make it optional, see what kind of bad practice would be to come in here, see that it wasn't there for some items and just make it optional. Oops, when in reality, the data was there, it was just in a different format. So it's much better to try to clean up the format as opposed to just altogether calling it quits on trying to gather that data. So we're going to save this agent to let that run because we're going to want to test a few things after it runs. And one more thing I did want to mention as well, when we do go to the jobs table, I'm going to cancel it and we'll restart it. When we do go to the jobs table and click on one of the jobs, if there are multiple lists in the agent, it will give us more information here. It will give us multiple restart indexes. For example, if we had another list on page 2 and it was failing in that list, it would tell us what index it was on page 1 and what index it was on the list in page 2. So keep that in mind. It's a very, very useful tool as you're trying to interact with the debugging tools of the agent builder. Alrighty, so let's take a look. I'm going to go ahead and run this right away. And let's go ahead and look through some of these options. Once again, we are currently in the agent dashboard. And I do want to show you, remember, this was harvesting results that we gathered 5 items. Now that data, since we finished the job, it got pushed to most recent completed run. And when we go back to harvesting results, we'll see that it's been cleared out because it's trying to gather new information now. All right, so let's go into harvesting settings. So harvesting settings are somewhere that you might be relatively often because there's a lot of useful settings that you can enable or disable here. This method tab allows you to alternate between premium and standard harvesting. Now, if it's a website that requires premium harvesting, such as Amazon, it won't give you a drop down like it doesn't right here. But if it does not require it, then you could switch. There would be a drop down to allow you to alternate between standard or premium. And if you're using premium, you'll have another drop down option that lets you choose the region that you want those IP addresses to be sent from. Usually just the default's fine, unless there's a particular reason you need it sent from a certain area. So now we'll look at behavior. Store item history is something that we're going to come back and take a look at in a little bit. It's a very useful tool. It essentially allows you to store data over multiple runs, over all of your runs actually. As you can see right now, we're only having the most recent completed run and then the current run, and it will overwrite those values each time we run it. So store item history, we'll circle back to that because we'll spend a little bit of time looking into what changes that implies, but this is where you would enable or disable that. Request web page images during processing is kind of an interesting one. We talked a little bit about request blocking in the agent builder, how we can block things like images and ads and media and fonts, things that we might not need. But even if we are not blocking those requests, by default, when ran on the harvesters, the images are not actually requested to come through because it takes time and it can slow the agent down. It takes processing power. So by default, because almost every website does not actually need the images, by default it won't load those in. And even if you're trying to capture images, you don't always need these images being actually requested in. So by default, when ran in the web console, as opposed to by default in the agent builder, when in the agent builder they are pulled in, requested automatically. In the web console, they are not. So the reason we have this setting here is from time to time, you're going to see that you build a perfect agent in the agent builder that runs all the way through, and you try it in the web console, and it doesn't work. So one of the first things I'll usually test in those scenarios is checking this box and trying again. Because sometimes, every once in a while, it's very rare, there are websites that do require those images in order to load the page content correctly. So this next setting kind of speaks for itself. It gives you the ability to limit how many credits an agent uses. So this is particularly useful for agents that you've just built and you're not sure how long they run for, or you might even potentially accidentally built it to form an infinite loop. So just keep using credits. So we have had several customers reach out before that have ended up leaving an agent for a week and not realizing that it was running the whole time, and it used a whole ton of credits. So I recommend setting this setting every time you build a new agent. Essentially just say how many credits you will allow it to use, and when it hits that many, it won't end the job or anything. It will essentially enter into it'll be called a limit. It will be called a limit reached state, but it's essentially the same thing as a paused state. So just keep that in mind. Alrighty, so this last option, which is do not create image and file packages, is also pretty useful, and I'm actually going to enable it. Actually, it's too late. We started running. We won't be able to change any of these settings while a job is running. But essentially, by default, when an agent runs, it will take any images and files that you have and package them. It will schedule a package job to allow you to download those as a zip file. However, if you check this box, it won't set it on a schedule. It will allow you to do it manually. Now, the benefit to that is if it's on a schedule, it will usually schedule it out about 10 minutes. So you'll let the agent run, it'll finish, and you have to wait 10 minutes for it to complete. If you're really anxious about getting those files, I'd recommend unchecking or checking this box and then just doing it manually, because it only takes a few minutes doing it manually. So usually I'll actually have this applied almost always in all of my agents. I did forget on this one, but when it finishes the job, we'll take a look at enabling that setting. Alrighty, so in error handling, we've already talked a little bit about, but we'll take some more time here because it's very important. Like I always say, errors are not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It gives us insight into what's going wrong on our agent so that we can fix it and get good data. So that being said, though the default settings are to attempt to ignore the error and continue, and ignore the error and continue here for website and agent errors, that will get you some data, but it doesn't always guarantee that you'll get excellent data. So my recommendation is that if something goes wrong, let the agent know that you want to know about it so that you can make the changes required, like we did today with that one error. If we hadn't set these settings to stop on errors, it would have skipped over that item and we would have never known that that data was there. We just were ignoring that error. So there is an option also to postpone a job. Instead of stopping with an error, we can postpone it for the amount of time we specify here. So the benefit to that is there's several websites that you may try to get data from, and they work, and the agent should work, but the website fails to serve up the web page for whatever reason. So postponing the job can be useful because it will essentially try it, and if it fails, it will try again in a minute. And generally, that will resolve a lot of those types of issues. One of the times that you'd want to be careful, though, essentially, is if it really is an error. Now there is a 30 restart limit, so as soon as it postpones 30 times, it will eventually just enter into an error state at that point. So you want to be careful that you're not trying to postpone on errors that are actually legitimate errors. But even if you do, it will try 30 times and then enter into an error state, and you'll be able to go fix it. And then another option is, instead of entering into an error state, either after it postpones 30 times or directly when it hits an error, it would just cancel the job immediately. Some people like to use this, for example, if you're using a schedule, which would make sense to some extent, right? If it's on a schedule and you try to run another job but it's in an error state, it won't start another job. So some people like to do that. It's my recommendation not to do this because you will, if your agent's in an error state, that's something you want to go take a look at right away before any other jobs kick off. So I usually will not use this setting, but there are use cases when you might want to. All right, the advanced setting, we really won't take much time here, specifically because if you are looking at this advanced tab in the harvesting settings, you are probably on the phone with one of our support representatives, simply because they're very unique scenarios that you would need to use these. They kind of speak for themselves, so I'm not going to take much time looking at them, but generally you won't need to worry about this too much. If you do come across it, just get in touch with the support rep or with your customer success manager if you're an enterprise license. All right, then the one option I do want to mention, though, that's the exception here, is this auto block option. So we know that there is auto block level 1 applied to our agent, and you can change it from level 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we're going to review that in depth tomorrow. But this is a relatively new feature, and so we, by request from some of our clients, from some of you and some of our customers, we added this option. Instead of having to go back to each of your agents, open them in the agent builder, apply whatever level of request blocking, 1, 2, or more, you can go directly into the account's harvesting settings and set it to either level 1 or level 2. Now, I know these levels probably don't mean that much to you yet. We'll go over them tomorrow, but just know that you could do them from here. It won't do it. It won't write it to the agent definition file is the difference. From in here, it will actually gather expressions and write it to the agent definition file, and it's built in as part of the agent. If you copy the agent, it will include it in there as well. The difference with this is it'll do level 1 or level 2 blocking live. So as the agent's running, it will try to block it. It really won't make a difference in performance, but as you copy agents, and if you see that it's not blocking as you'd expect, that's why. Alrighty, so there's our error handling settings and our harvesting settings. Let's go ahead and refresh and see how many items we're at. Looks like we've got 6 items so far, which is pretty good. We probably still want it to go longer. I am going to stop it though, because there's a few things that we're going to want to see. At the end of the day today, we'll let it run all the way through so that when we come back tomorrow, we'll be able to take a look and see how it looks. But there's a few key things I want to go over, so we'll stop it there. Once again, this is the agent dashboard. Remember that you can move these fields around to make them fit however long you want. Double click will make them the minimum length you'd need. I do want to mention that this will persist. So if you leave the dashboard and come back, either the order, if you drag them to different orders, or the length of each column will persist. So keep that in mind. Also, remember that you are allowed, once again, I'm just canceling so that we'll finish the job and then we can modify a few settings to see how they work. You can modify the number of items that you have per page, and you could go navigate different pages of data down here at the bottom once you start gathering a whole lot of information. So we'll see here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items now. So as soon as it finishes refreshing, looks like it already has actually written it. It's got all of these new 6 items written to our most recent completed run. So that's good news. All right, so let's move on to notifications. Kind of speak for themselves, but notifications allow you to input an email address, and you can do a comma-separated list to add multiple email addresses to alert you if any of these scenarios occur. So that can be very useful, especially one that I find very useful is the agent stops because of an error. Generally, you want to know that immediately so you can go back in and fix it. So these are agent level notifications. So if this agent hits any of those scenarios, it would alert you. There are also global notifications. So you could set notifications for all of your agents if any of these things happens on any of your agents. So that would just be from the agents list, and you'd do the same thing, enter an email address. Okay. All right, so one thing I want to show you really quick is if we go into the data export tab option right here, it gives us an images and files tab. And we'll see, it looks like this one packaged really quickly actually, so that's great. Generally, it will set it on a schedule and it might take longer, which is why I said I like to apply that setting. But it looks like it already did it immediately. So we're going to show you really quick how you would export well, first let's start with data. So data here is how you would export directly to your computer. So you can choose between harvesting results and most recent completed run. You can choose what view you want. Currently, we only have the default view. You can see it right up here. We're going to add a view today to help us get some perspective on that. And you can choose the file format that you want, and you can download it directly to your computer. You can also download the history of jobs in your jobs table. So what we were looking at before, right in here in this jobs table, we could export that from here to our computer. So the images and files, like I said, these will export separately from your data because your data, right, will be a series of columns and rows of data. But the actual files can't really be stored in that type of setup. So we have packages, file packages for each column of data that you have. So for the run that just finished just a few minutes ago, it has 5 fields, images 1 through 5. These were the 5 fields that we captured images in. So we can come right in here and click download, and it will download a package holding images. And the names of the images for each folder will be the item ID associated with it. So if we come back over here to our data, we have 6 items. So you'll see that this item ID 1006 is associated with, it's small because remember we captured thumbnails, is associated with this 1006 item ID item. So some of you might be thinking, right, that the item ID really doesn't give us that much information. It's hard to associate that with what we want. There is an option to modify that, and I'm going to show you how we do that really quick. Before we do that, I'm going to immediately change this setting like we talked about so that next time we run it, we won't see any delay in scheduling. So we're going to go over to our Fields tab. Before swinging back to changing the file name, let's first take a look at each of our fields. So we'll see we've got, most of them are text type. We have 1 number that we set from the agent builder, and we have 5 file types. So real quick overview of fields, you can click into any of these, and it will allow you to change the name of the field. It will allow you to give it a description, and you can change the format. So currently we only have text, file, and number that we're using, but there's also date, time, and URL. Only times you would use that is because the fields or the views or potentially, so the view criteria or the view sorting that we're going to get to in a little bit will be dependent on what type of field it is. For example, if you try to sort numbers alphabetically, they will sort differently than if you try to sort them numerically. So that's why when we use total reviews, we want to treat it as a number as opposed to just plain text. Each field also has the option to enable it as confidential. So what that means, if you're dealing with sensitive information and perhaps you have many users on your account, you can mark a field as confidential, and then only those users who have confidential permissions on their account, user account, would be able to see those fields. Otherwise, they would show up as just start out fields in the actual data table. So we're going to focus right here on image 1. We'll come in here and we will see that when it's a file, if it's text, we don't have this extra box here, but when we choose file, we have an option to name the file. So by default, you can see it's grayed out because by default it passes in the item ID for each item and uses that as the file name. But if we want to pass something else in, for example, we want it to be based on the product name, we can use parameters within percentage signs again to pass in each value's product name, each item's product name, and name the file that way. So if we click Save Now and go to Export, Images and Files. Now remember, these were already packaged, so these will have the old names. So we're going to click Repackage. And that might take a minute or two, so we'll swing back there, but we're going to see it will package new data, new file packages for each of the 5 fields. And image 1, since we've changed the file name, we'll use the product name instead of the item ID to identify it. Like I said, that'll take just a few minutes, so we'll let that run, and we'll kind of move on to a few other things. One thing I also want to talk about is scheduling. Scheduling is another one of those things that kind of speaks for itself, but you can set different intervals on how you want the agent to run. Keep in mind that if the agent is already if it's not in a ready state, meaning it has other jobs active, whether they be paused or canceled or errored, if that is going on, then the schedule will not kick off another job. So keep that in mind, that if you're running your agent, it's not kicking off on schedules. It may be because you've got them running too frequently and it's trying to kick off once before other ones have finished. So let's remember that. Sequences, though, which are up here, which we'll go over tomorrow, would allow you potentially a way to set up multiple different schedules, because right now there's really only one way to set up a schedule. But if we use a sequence, there's technically ways that we can have it run at different types of schedules. So let's see if our export finished, our package job. Oh, it says it's still finishing. They're here, but let's give it a few more minutes because it might still be filling those files, those folders, sorry. Okay, so let's talk about publishing. Publishing, we have a variety of different publishing methods at Mozenda. Email is a very common one, that you can send your data directly to an email. You won't be able to send file packages to email, and you can see actually that there's a couple different options. If we, for example, go to Amazon, here we can specify if we want to publish images and file packages, but email won't give us that option because email doesn't have essentially enough space to be able to send that much in a single email. But yeah, you can set up your publisher to run in a variety of different ways. You can have it run on a schedule. You can only run it manually when you come and click Save and Publish Now, or you can set it to publish every time the agent completes. Similar to scheduling, you can only set up one publish setting per agent. But if you use a sequencer, there's also ways to manipulate that to have it published a variety of different fields. We're going to circle back to the publishing after we've enabled store item history, because there will be a few different things that happen once we apply that. So we'll cancel here, and let's go back into our export, images and files, and we are going to download the image 1 file package and open it up, and we'll see that instead of the item IDs, we now have the product name as the file name. Alrighty, so cool, we're making good time. Let's go ahead and go back to our data. We're going to talk about views now. So views are a very useful tool. Now, keep in mind, Mozenda's main goal, as we've mentioned before, is data extraction. And so, you know, the amount that you can do to analyze that data to an extent is somewhat limited within the agent builder, within the web console. But we do provide, at the same time, several different ways that you can view the data to make it much cleaner when you export it. So, for example, let's put ourselves in a position where we have these 6 items, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But let's say that we only want items that have 500 reviews or more. So we'll see that in total reviews, all of them have it except for 1. And let's say that of the rest of them that are there, we only want maybe the TCL ones. So there's a TCL here and a TCL here. So we're going to create a new view. and we'll just call it 500 reviews. So we can choose which fields we want in which column headings we want in this new view. We don't have to have all of them. We're going to scroll down to the bottom. You'll see some of them say system fields. These are fields that you did not capture, but that the system automatically provides. For example, item ID. So we're going to include item ID, and we'll say product name, product URL, total reviews. Maybe we want the website we got it from. We don't need the images for this or these details. Maybe we do want the price, and we'll say we want average rating as well. So all's looking good. Then we come over to criteria, and we specify that in this view, we only want items that have total reviews greater than 499, right? If we want 500 or higher. So you'll see that because we made total reviews a number, it gives us the option to use operators such as greater than or less than. If we had left it as text, we would not have those options. If we had left it as text, we would have the options that we're going to see when we set up product name, which is a text field. So it'll have text-based comparisons: contains, does not contain, is empty, is not empty, etc. So we're going to search for contains TCL and add that. Now you can change the operator here between and or. So you can say we want reviews that have at least 500 or more, or that are at least TCL. So we want all TCLs or all ones that are over 500 or ones that are both, if we were to change this to or. But we're going to leave it as and because we want both of these criteria to be met. We need 499 reviews and for it to be a TCL type product to get what we want. And additionally, we want to sort by the number of total reviews from smallest to largest. So if we look over here, right, let's do actually largest to smallest, because if we look at our data set right now in order of item ID, 1006 through 1011, the two that are going to show up, right, are going to be these two TCLs, because they're both TCL and TCL, and they both have over 500 reviews. But currently, the lower one is at 550, is earlier than the higher one, 4,515. So we're going to say largest to smallest because that'll swap the order so we can see how that works. So we're going to click save here, and we'll see that up here in the top right corner, we now have 500 reviews and the default option. And we'll see that our 500 reviews includes all these fields that we requested, only the ones with TCL in them, and is organized from largest to smallest. If we were to come in here and edit the 500 reviews view, we could change the criteria so that we don't care if it has TCL, we just need more than 499 reviews, and click save, and we'll see that we'll get quite a few more organized from largest to smallest. There's one more option within views that we didn't quite get to yet, which is the RSS feed. RSS feeds aren't used as frequently anymore, but we do have an option, and if you don't know what it is, you probably won't need to use it. Most of the time when people use this, it's because they already use RSS feeds in their workflow processes. But it does give you the option to essentially take some of these fields that you're interested in, take this view, and you can essentially create a URL that you could query the data from. So this is an option, and it'll take a little bit to load up because it's creating that URL. But it includes all this data that we want to include with it. So it can be useful. A lot of people prefer to use our API, which you can access at mozenda.com/API instead of using RSS feeds, but the option is available if you have a use case for using it. All right, so we are just about done with the content that we wanted to cover. We still have a few more things, so we're going to jump straight into that. Just one more thing, actually, which is the store item history. So we're going to come up to harvesting settings and enable store item history and click save. And when we do that, we're going to see that we now have a third option, which is called all items ever found. So if we remember right, when a job finishes, the results from harvesting results gets pushed into most recent completed run, and most recent completed run gets overwritten. However, if you have store item history enabled, that data, instead of just being overwritten, it will get pushed over to the all items ever found view, which will include a list of all the items that your agent has ever captured. Now, this could result in a lot of duplicates. There is an option called within the fields tab to set unique fields, and I'll just show you an example of that. We could come and set fields as unique. We won't get too much in depth into this time. I'm just going to set one field as unique, which is going to be product URL. And what that allows us to do, and this one could be a whole training on its own, which is why we unfortunately won't get to it too much in our training this week, but you can track changes across multiple runs. So you can run an agent, have a unique field, say essentially key off of the product URL field, and if we run the agent again and we see another item that has the same product URL, look at all the rest of the fields for that item, and we'll be able to tell if it's been changed, so it would be marked as a changed item, an unchanged item, meaning it's the same, or if it can't even find it, it will show up as a removed item, or if it doesn't have if the product URL that the new run finds is not found in our history or in the last run, it will show up as a new or added item. So we're going to set product URL because we might take a little bit of time, depending on how much time we have tomorrow, just to glance at what that looks like. But when we come look at data, we'll see in most recent completed run, each of these fields are marked as added. And because we've just applied stored item history, if we run it again and capture items with the same product URLs, these would show up a little bit differently. They would either be unchanged items or changed items if there was a value that had changed in them. Great, so a few other things that change when you apply stored item history. One thing, like I mentioned in publishing, it will now allow you in the view to specify which items you want to publish, added, changed, or unchanged, or removed. It also allows you to apply change markup, which hopefully we'll get to see tomorrow. Essentially, if there is an item that it's the same item based on that unique identifier that you mentioned, meaning it found it in the last run and this newest run, but one of the other fields changed, we could show change markup, which you can see right here, and it would show you within the web console the actual values that got deleted and the ones that were added. So hopefully we'll get some time to take a look at that. I'll try to squeeze it into the schedule for tomorrow. Usually we have a little bit extra time on training 4, so I'll try to show that because that's a really, really cool feature. So keep that in mind when you're publishing. If you do have stored item history, you could specify that you only want to be emailed or sent data that is new. So if you didn't want any unchanged items, that would be good. Good way to do that. Okay, the other thing that changes is in the jobs table, we will see a few new things. So first thing I want to show you is each of these jobs right now, we could go and click view job data, and it would actually take us to a tab called history that's been added right here, history. Currently we don't have any in history because we haven't ran any jobs since we've enabled stored item history. We'll do that in just a minute, hopefully. But essentially you can look at, from the jobs table, go and see any of these jobs and what they gathered back in history. So once we run it today, it'll make a little more sense because we'll be able to compare it. So we'll take a few minutes at the beginning of tomorrow's training to review that. But it's a good thing to note that if you want to look at how many a past run captured, or what values a past run captured, or what values were captured on certain dates, you can do that from here. And while we're still here, I'm going to kick off one job. It looks like it entered into kind of a weird state, so let's reload that agent dashboard. Let's go straight to jobs, and we're going to say new job and create a job. And one thing we're going to talk about tomorrow is the ability to add multiple jobs to an agent. So right now we have one job running. We're going to add one more as well, and we'll also add parameters tomorrow as well. And you can see that you can actually have more than one job running at a time on agent. Now there are limits based on how many number of concurrent jobs you have in your account and how many people are currently scraping on our systems that particular website. I'm gonna refresh because it's still showing canceled up there at the top. But you can run multiple jobs, and one reason to note that, especially with stored item history enabled, is that it creates, you'll notice there's a difference. Right here it's got a thin line between the two different jobs. Here it's got a much thicker line. And what that is denoting is the difference in bookmarks. So these are individual jobs. You'll see that it gives you the option to view bookmark data or view job data. In this instance, it will be the same because this job ran on its own. It ran to completion without any other jobs running at the same time. This job did the same thing, and so it's its own bookmark and its own data. When we get up into here, we won't be able to see it quite yet until the job finishes, but we'll be able to look at each of these jobs individually. But because they're running at the same time, they're also part of the same bookmark. So once the job's finish, we'll be able to see that there will be an option up here at the top that will allow us to, just like it shows down here, job data and bookmark data, this will allow us to see bookmark data for both of these jobs, whereas these would just show for each individual job. So the reason you use that, and we'll see it tomorrow, so I'm really excited for it because it's one of the favorite ways, my favorite ways that we can set up agents is we can split jobs, split an agent into two and allow this first agent to simply capture product URLs, which we're going to do tomorrow. So essentially we're going to have the first agent just capture these product URLs and feed them into the second agent. And the second agent will take each of those product URLs, which will be about 30 or so, 32. And instead of doing them one by one, it's going to run three to five jobs at a time, depending on what we decide tomorrow, which would essentially mean it would run 3 to 5 times faster. And we would see like one job would go collect items 1 through 10, for example, those 10 product URLs. The second one would do 11 through 20, and the third would do 21 through to the end. So it'd be running 3 times as fast, and they would all be in the same bookmark. So when we go look at the bookmark data when it finishes, it would still show all of the data instead of just the 10 items that one job collected. So all that will be visible from the history tab once it's accessible. So one more thing to note, see how it says 35 seconds ago? It's showing data that was pushed into history essentially 35 seconds ago. Let's see what we've got here. We may need to wait actually for the job to finish, but what I do want you to know is that this number can be a little bit misleading because as soon as this gets populated, when the job finishes, it will hold the data associated with this run right here. Now this run didn't run 35 seconds ago. What happened is these ones got kicked off about 35 seconds ago. So what that tag means in the history tab right here, what this reference means is it doesn't mean how long ago that data was captured. It means how long ago it was pushed into history. And remember that it only gets pushed into history after a new job runs to completion and finishes. So we'll cover a little bit more on that tomorrow morning. Once these 2 jobs finish, we'll be able to see it more clearly. But with that, we've hit everything we wanted to hit today. I know this was kind of a lot of content. Luckily, at least I don't think it's not too much of it is too complex. But we want to make sure that you're aware of all the different settings that you have available to you within the web console. Specifically, views can be very useful. If you're trying to clean up your data, track item history can be very useful. Store item history and track changes. So tomorrow, what we're going to do, we essentially now, from what I can tell, have a very good agent now. Our agent has proper optionals where required. It's got alternate XPaths. We've written our own XPaths, and so this is a pretty solid agent. It will probably work well for whoever uses it for a long time to come. The difference, however, being that there are still optimizations that we can make. So right now, this is kind of the point where you might get to, and I said this after the first day too, where you get there and you're like, this is good enough. We'll stop here, but we want to keep going, right? So we wrote our own XPaths, and then tomorrow we want to keep going even further. We're going to apply request blocking to make the agent as fast as we possibly can. We're going to split it into 2 jobs to see how multi-agent processes would work, and we're going to use the sequencer to automate those processes. So tomorrow's, like I said, one of my favorite trainings to go over because we get to cover such cool topics and such cool agent structure. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all there. We're running just over time. I'm going to see, we do have a few questions. Once again, a few more people asking about the videos. Those will be sent out hopefully by the end of the week, but might run into next week. Probably will be next week, actually. I have another question asking why you don't have the XPath or DOM options on the Agent Builder. That could be because in the Agent Builder, if you don't see any windows, you can come up to File, Windows, and you could enable any windows that you want to see. Once you have one or more open, you could just right-click the blue bar and enable the ones that you're interested in. We had another question that asks why the Agent Builder uses IE and not Chrome. It is what we built the system on previously. we have hope down the road to be able to apply a Chrome solution to it, but it does require a massive overhaul to it. So whereas IE is slowly becoming outdated, it's where most of our processes run currently. So that's why it runs on it today. So I'm trying to get through as many of these questions as I can. I think there's just a few more. I did hear somebody say there's one question that I'll read it out. It says, did you say there was a limit to how many agents could be scheduled to run at the same time? Yes, there is. If you're talking about a specific agent level, you can only set one schedule per agent. But within your web console, you'll be able to go to the menu up here and go to account settings. And you'll be able to see down here in concurrent jobs how many concurrent agent jobs can be running at any given time. So it could be 5 in one agent and then 5 across 5 other agents to add up to your 10. But it also needs to take into account, for example, certain websites like Amazon. I think on average you can only get up to about 5 jobs running at one moment. So it's dependent on how many concurrent jobs you have, but it's also dependent on how many concurrent jobs our system can handle at the time. So usually it's quite consistent though, and just requires a little bit of testing. If you'd like more information about how to be sure about how many jobs you're allowed, reach out to support or your customer success manager, because they'll have some good answers for you. So with that, I think I've been able to hit each of the questions. Actually, I'm sorry, there was one more. I think this was a follow-up question from last time. It says, after we have completed a page by pulling a table, how do we go back and view the individual paths to use XPath? If I understand that right, the question is if we're using a table to capture data. So if we're using a capture table action, let's go find a new table. So like right in here, we would say action, capture, where is it? Capture table. So it says click a header cell. So let's capture this one and let's actually say that these are our headers. So we're going to choose customer rating and price, and it will discover the rest of these for us. Might find some that we don't want, but then we want to click a non-header cell, such as the price right here. And then it says click a non-header cell in the same column. Now we've inverted it. We're using columns as rows, so we'll click another one there. And then it will also give us an option to do that again. So we'll click another one here and another one. And it will build data off it. This one didn't work quite right. It's not finding things exactly how we'd hope. That's why I recommend generally using a capture list over table, but sometimes they can work quite great. But to answer your question, it will build a list like this that's a capture table, and you can come in and modify these XPaths, but it does get quite a little bit more complicated because you need to set generalized XPaths to find each header and each column and each row. So it's a little bit more advanced. If you're using a capture table, I'd recommend, honestly, at that point, you probably don't want to try to write your own XPath most of the time, just because it can get quite complicated, but it is definitely doable. And if you do want to use one, you might the first few times want to work with a support representative so they can help you build out that flow. So I'm going to delete that though, because we won't need it. So with that, I'm going to keep letting our agent run overnight. When we come in tomorrow, we'll see, hopefully it doesn't hit any errors. If it does, we'll fix them and move forward. But tomorrow should be a great training. Thanks for everybody, for showing up today, and I'll look forward to seeing you each tomorrow. Thanks for taking time today, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.